Mira wasn't looking for revenge. She just wanted a little respect. But when her sister-in-law spat on her dreams and her own family joined in the mockery, Mira did something no one saw coming. She rose in silence, and when she spoke, the world listened, especially the man who now called her Madam. Even though she once called him Brother, Mira had always carried a quiet dream in her heart to cook food that made people feel at home. She didn't want anything big, just a simple food cart near the school in her community. She could already picture it, the smell of jollof rice filling the air, children coming by after class, teachers smiling as they tasted her meals. But when she shared her idea with her family, they didn't support her. Her sister-in-law, Dahlia, laughed loud and long. "Who will buy from you?" she said, shaking her head. "You can't even season meat properly." The words cut deep, but what hurt even more was Nico, Mira's own husband, sitting silently, not defending her, not even looking her in the eyes. At home, it didn't get better. Her mother sighed and told her to stop wasting time. "Focus on your home, Mira," she said. "Be a proper woman, not some hawker with apron dreams." Mira felt alone, as if the people closest to her couldn't see her heart. But instead of fighting or shouting, she went quiet. She saved up little by little. Then, one morning, she walked into a small shop, asked for a second-hand umbrella, some cooking pots, and just enough ingredients to make a few meals. She took a small loan from a women's group that supported local startups. Her hands shook when she set up her first cart under a tree near the school gate. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fancy, but it was hers. The first time she lit the fire, her heart beat so fast she could barely hold the spoon. Students passed by without stopping. Some laughed, others just stared, but Mira stood straight, her head high, even as the sun burned her skin and her back ached from standing all day. Because deep down, she believed she wasn't cooking just for money. She was cooking with heart, with hope, with a dream that refused to die. And even though no one believed in her yet, Mira had already started believing in herself. The first week of Mira's food cart was not what she hoped for. She woke up early every morning, cleaned her pots, carried her ingredients, and set up near the school with a hopeful heart. But the truth was hard. Flies buzzed around more than people did. Students passed by without stopping, and most teachers didn't even glance at her. Some days, she sold nothing at all. Her back hurt from standing all day in the hot sun. Her hands were tired, her feet sore, but she didn't stop. She kept showing up every day because she knew all dreams started small. By the third day, something worse happened. Mira arrived early as usual, only to find her biggest cooking pot missing. Someone had stolen it during the night. She stood there, frozen, looking at the empty space where it used to be. That pot was old, but it meant everything to her. For a moment, she wanted to cry, but instead, she took a deep breath, used her smaller pot, and kept cooking. She refused to let the thief steal her spirit too. Later that same day, Dahlia showed up, not to help, not to support, but to mock. She stood near the cart with folded arms, looking around like she was disgusted. "You're embarrassing this family," she whispered with a fake smile. "Do you really think this nonsense will take you anywhere?" Then she walked away, laughing loud enough for others to hear. Mira heard it too. It hurt, deeply, but she didn't reply. She just stirred the pot slowly, fighting back tears, letting the steam hide her face. Every time Mira cooked, she added more than just spices. She added her hope, her silence, her faith. She didn't just stir rice and stew, she stirred courage. She didn't shout back or beg for support. She let her food speak for her. And then, one afternoon, something changed. A teacher from the nearby school walked by, looking tired and hungry. He stopped, looked at the food for a moment and asked softly, "How much is a plate?" Mira served him jollof rice with fried plantains. The man sat under the tree nearby and took the first bite. His eyes widened. He didn't speak, but he cleaned the plate to the last grain. The next day, he came back, not alone, but with 5 other teachers. They laughed, joked, and said, "We heard there's magic in your jollof." Mira smiled for the first time in days. That moment was small, but it changed everything. Because that day, the smell of her food traveled faster than Dahlia's laughter. Mira didn't need to put up big signs or shout in the streets. Her food began to speak for itself. Every plate she served carried not just taste, but memories. The way she seasoned her rice, the softness of her yam, the way her stew hugged the tongue. It reminded people of something they had almost forgotten: home, love, their grandmother's kitchens. Her jollof rice made one teacher smile so wide he said, "This tastes like my childhood." That one sentence became the seed that bloomed into something bigger. Soon more and more people began to stop by. Teachers brought friends. Students told their parents. Even passers-by followed the smell in the air, hoping to taste what everyone was whispering about. Mira didn't raise her voice. She didn't post flyers, but the whispers of satisfied mouths were louder than any advert. Word of mouth became her strongest tool. In just a few weeks, her small cart couldn't keep up with the growing demand. So Mira used her savings to build something slightly bigger, a simple wooden stall, right under the same tree. It still wasn't fancy, but now she had space to cook freely, to serve faster, and to smile more. She even hired a schoolgirl named Titi who used to come after class and hang around watching her cook. Titi wiped tables, packed orders, and laughed with the customers. Mira paid her a little every day and gave her free meals. The girl became like a little sister in that stall, and the customers loved seeing her there too. Back at home, though, things hadn't changed much. At a family dinner, Mira brought a bowl of her special pepper soup. She placed it on the table quietly. Everyone took some, except Dahlia. She sniffed it, then pushed the bowl away with a fake smile. "So what?" she said loudly. "Local food for local fools." She laughed, but this time, no one laughed with her. Nico stayed silent, but something in his eyes looked different, like he was remembering the smell from somewhere else. Truth was, Nico had already tasted that same soup earlier that week. He had started sneaking out during his lunch breaks at work. He didn't go far, just down the road to a food stall run by the same woman everyone once mocked, the same woman he once looked away from. There, no one knew he was Mira's husband. He sat quietly, ate slowly, and every time he left, he said the same thing: "Thank you, not just for the food, but for something deeper, something that tasted like truth." And every time he went back, he felt more ashamed, because the woman they once called useless was now the one feeding half the community, with food, with grace, with strength that didn't shout but never backed down. It was a warm Sunday afternoon, and the whole family had gathered at Dahlia's house for Nico's promotion party. Mira had worked hard preparing the food for the event. She stayed up late the night before, marinating, stirring, and packing everything with love. She arrived early, her trays full of jollof rice, peppered chicken, yam porridge, and stew. She laid everything neatly on the table, careful not to spill a drop. Even though she wasn't treated with much respect, she still gave her best. She hoped that maybe, just maybe, this day would be different. Maybe they would see how far she had come. But Dahlia had other plans. As guests began to arrive and people started praising the smell of the food, Mira saw the look in Dahlia's eyes: cold, jealous, fake smiles. Dahlia walked over with a glass in one hand and too much attitude in the other. She leaned over the table, pretending to adjust something. Then, with one quick movement, she knocked over the main tray of Mira's spicy pepper chicken. The tray crashed to the ground, food flying everywhere. The smell of pepper filled the air. The room went silent. Everyone turned. Dahlia gasped, hand on her chest, acting shocked. "Oh no," she said with a dramatic sigh. "You want to serve this mess at my husband's promotion party?" Her voice was loud, meant to embarrass. People around tried to look away, pretend nothing happened. Some even laughed quietly. Mira stood frozen for a second, eyes wide, heart heavy. But then, she smiled. Not because she was okay, but because something inside her clicked. She bent down slowly and began to pick up the pieces. Not just the chicken and rice, but the broken tray, the spilled stew, the small bits of her pride that had been thrown on the floor. She didn't shout. She didn't cry loudly. Her hands moved quietly, wiping tears as she cleaned. That evening, when she got home, she didn't sulk. Instead, she sat down with a notebook and stared at the name on the front: Mira's Meals. She crossed it out. She wrote a new name: Spilled Pepper Kitchen. And underneath it, a line: Where we turn disrespect into recipe. She smiled again, this time stronger. That day, Dahlia had tried to humiliate her in front of everyone, but instead of breaking Mira, she helped her discover a new fire. That spilled pepper wasn't a mistake. It was a sign, a push. And from that day on, Mira didn't just cook food, she cooked strength. turned every insult into flavor and every act of shame into power. 6 months had passed, and life had turned in ways no one expected. Nico's company suddenly downsized. He had walked into work one morning and walked out jobless by afternoon. There were no warnings, no soft landings, just a letter, a handshake, and silence. The salary stopped, and so did the comfort. Bills piled up, savings dried out, and the house that once laughed at Mira now sat in quiet worry. Meanwhile, Mira's food stall had grown into something much bigger. Spilled Pepper Kitchen was now a full restaurant, standing proud at the corner of the main road. Bright, clean, and always smelling of something delicious. Customers came from across town, and Mira had a small team helping her run the place. She needed more hands, more strength in the kitchen, and so she posted job openings. One of those applications arrived without a name, just a simple email and a CV. But Mira knew the handwriting, the style, the silence behind the message. It was Nico. She sat still for a while, reading the words her husband had written, asking for a chance. He didn't mention that he was her husband. He didn't beg. He just applied like everyone else. Mira didn't delete it. She didn't ignore it. She called him in. The day Nico walked into her restaurant, he looked smaller than usual, not in size, but in spirit. His shoulders drooped, his eyes didn't meet hers, and his hands were shaking slightly. Mira greeted him kindly, like she would any other applicant. No emotion, just calm. She handed him the job contract. Nico looked at it, then at her. Their eyes met for just 1 second, a silent moment that held years of history. Then, he looked back down at the paper. It read, position, kitchen manager, reporting, to Madam Mira Ose. His throat went dry. His hands paused, but he picked up the pen and signed. Not because he was forced, but because the truth was right in front of him. Mira was no longer just his wife. She was his boss, the woman he once didn't defend, the woman his family had laughed at, the same woman who now ran a restaurant that was feeding dozens of people every day. Mira didn't smile in pride or speak with anger. She simply nodded and said, "You start on Monday." It was quiet, simple, but powerful. That paper was more than a job contract. It was a full circle moment, a silent reminder that the woman they once called useless was now the one writing the names and signing the paychecks. The kitchen was already busy that morning. Staff members were slicing vegetables, stirring pots, and preparing for the lunch rush. But there was a strange silence when Nico entered. It was his first day on the job, and even though no one said it out loud, they all knew who he was. Some had heard whispers, others had seen him before. But today, he wasn't Mira's husband. He was just another worker in an apron, standing in a place that belonged to the woman everyone once ignored. Nico stood stiffly near the sink, pretending to check the knives and clean the counter. He looked everywhere except at Mira. His hands moved, but his heart beat fast. He had never imagined a day like this, where the same woman he once overlooked would now be the one everyone listened to, the one everyone respected. Then Mira walked in. She didn't wear heavy makeup or shout orders. She simply stepped into the kitchen with quiet confidence. The moment she entered, the room paused. Everyone turned. The staff stood still, waiting. Mira looked around, smiled softly at her team, and then her eyes rested on Nico. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and gentle. Nico's throat felt dry. He looked at her just for a second, then looked down again. He nodded once, then spoke quietly. "Good morning, madam." The word hung in the air like perfume. Everyone heard it. The staff exchanged glances but said nothing. Mira simply nodded and moved on, greeting others, checking on the soup, and giving instructions as if nothing unusual had happened. But outside, standing near the window with a tray of muffins in her hands, was Dahlia. She had come early, hoping to show off her baking and maybe even make jokes about Mira's restaurant. But the moment she saw Nico in an apron, standing at attention, calling Mira "Madam" in front of the staff, she froze. Her hands tightened around the tray, her mouth slightly open. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This was the same woman she had mocked, the same one she said was embarrassing the family, the same Mira whose meals she had once kicked to the floor. And now, that same Mira walked through a kitchen full of workers who respected her, while Dahlia stood outside, uninvited, with muffins no one had asked for. The shift began. Mira returned to her work. Nico followed instructions. The team moved in sync, and from outside, Dahlia could only watch, silent, stunned, and holding a tray that suddenly felt too heavy. 2 weeks after Nico started working in the restaurant, Mira was in her office going through the weekly reports. The restaurant was doing well, customers were happy, the kitchen was running smoothly, and every day new faces came in asking for that spicy jollof everyone is talking about. Mira was calm, focused, and grateful. Then, there was a soft knock on her door. She looked up. It was Dahlia. Her once proud and sharp sister-in-law now stood at the doorway, looking nothing like her usual self. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept or had been crying. Her makeup was smudged, and her lips trembled as if she had practiced what to say 100 times, but still didn't know where to begin. Mira said nothing at first. She simply pointed to the chair in front of her desk. Dahlia sat slowly, her hands shaking slightly. For a moment, there was complete silence. The air was heavy. Then Dahlia spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't let people find out." She couldn't even say the full sentence, but Mira understood. Dahlia didn't want the world to know her husband now worked under the very woman she once mocked. She didn't want the neighbors or church members or family friends to find out that the same Mira she insulted, laughed at, and pushed down was now the one giving her family bread. Mira looked at her, not with hate, not with revenge in her eyes, just peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you've walked through fire and survived. The kind of peace that doesn't need to shout or prove anything. "Dahlia," Mira said softly, "I'm not your enemy." Dahlia blinked fast, trying to stop the tears from falling. "But when you kicked me down," Mira continued, "you didn't think I'd stand again." Her voice was calm but steady. "You thought that tray of food on the floor was the end of me, that no one would ever eat from my hands again, that I'd go back to being silent, small, and unseen." She leaned in slightly, her tone still kind. "But I didn't stay down. And now, I'm not kneeling, I'm hiring." Dahlia lowered her head, the tears now running freely. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain. She just sat there quietly, facing the truth. The woman she once tried to break was now stronger than ever, not with revenge, but with grace. Mira stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at her restaurant. "Life has a funny way of turning," she said, "and sometimes the people you try to bury become the roots of something bigger." Dahlia didn't say another word. She just stood up, wiped her face and walked out slowly, carrying not shame, but a lesson she would never forget. It was the end-of-year staff party at Spilled Pepper Kitchen. The restaurant was decorated with bright lights, laughter filled the air, and the smell of Mira's famous stew floated around the room. Every table was full. Staff, their families, and some loyal customers who had become more like friends. It was a day of joy, music, and celebration. But the biggest moment came when Mira stepped onto the small stage. She wore a simple but beautiful dress, her face glowing with peace. She looked out at the crowd and smiled at the people who had walked with her through hard days and sweet victories. Behind her stood the people who worked in her kitchen every day, the chefs, the cleaners, the servers, and right beside them stood Nico, wearing the restaurant's colors with quiet respect. Mira held the microphone and began to speak. "I remember the first day I cooked under a tree with flies and doubt around me," she said. "I remember the tray of food that was kicked to the ground and how I went home in tears. But I also remember the first teacher who said, 'This reminds me of my grandmother's cooking.' I remember the first time I had enough to pay someone else. I remember every single step." People in the audience nodded. Some clapped softly, others wiped small tears. Then Mira looked at the staff behind her and continued, "You are not just workers. You are my team, my strength, my family, the family I built with my own 2 hands." The room filled with loud claps and cheers. Her staff smiled proudly, and Nico clapped too, not because he had to, but because he meant it. But in the back of the room, at the last row of chairs, her real family sat in silence. Mira's mother, her cousins, and most of all, Dahlia. They had come out of duty, maybe even curiosity, but not support. And now, sitting there, they had no words left, no fake smiles, no applause in their hands. Dahlia looked down at the ground, unable to meet Mira's eyes. Her husband, the man she once used to mock Mira, now stood proudly as part of Mira's team. He wore the kitchen uniform. He clapped with the others. He belonged on that stage more than in the back row. A group photo was taken at the end. Mira stood in the center, arms around her staff, smiling. That picture would soon be shared online, in local newspapers, even hung in the restaurant. And for everyone who saw it, They didn't just see a successful woman. They saw a message. The people who once laughed at her were now watching her rise, and she didn't push them down. She just rose higher, with quiet strength and the kind of family no one could ever steal. Mira stood behind the counter of her restaurant one morning, holding a spoon and a memory. She had been working on something special for weeks, a dish that didn't just feed the stomach, but also told a story. After all the pain, all the judgment, and all the silence she had swallowed over the years, it was finally time to serve something of her own, something that came straight from the parts of her past she never spoke about, but never forgot. The new dish appeared on the menu quietly, without any big announcement, just a simple name written in bold letters, Dahlia's Swallow of Humility. Underneath it, in smaller words, it said, soft yam balls in pepper stew. On the first day, customers noticed the strange name. Who's Dahlia? Some asked. What's the story behind this? Others said with curiosity. Mira never gave a full answer. She'd just smile gently, wiping her hands on her apron, and say, it's a family recipe, inspired by the people who doubted me most. That was all she needed to say, because the dish spoke for itself. The yam balls were soft, like pillows. The stew was thick, deep red, and full of fire. It warmed the tongue and lit a path through the heart. People who tasted it couldn't explain what they felt. Some said it reminded them of their mother's food. Some said it made them cry. Some just ordered it again and again, without knowing why. It's spicy, one woman said. It's honest, said a man, wiping his eyes. It's healing, whispered a quiet customer who had been eating alone. Soon the dish became the most ordered item on the menu, but no one really knew the full story behind it. Only Mira knew how it was made from the same yam she once begged her sister to lend her. Only she remembered how that stew once spilled on the ground when Dahlia kicked her pot over. Only Mira could smile now, not from bitterness, but from power. She had taken something painful, something that once brought her shame, and turned it into the most beautiful part of her menu. Dahlia never dared to step inside the restaurant again. But one day, someone said they saw her standing across the street, staring at the signboard with the dish's name on it. She didn't come closer. She just watched in silence as people walked in, laughing and excited to taste Dahlia's swallow of humility. And inside, behind the counter, Mira stirred the pot one more time, gently, with care. She had found peace, not through revenge, but through flavor. And every single person who tasted that stew carried a piece of her story home, even if they never knew it. Mira sat in her bright, sunlit office, sipping tea and scrolling through customer reviews on her food app. The app now had thousands of users across the city, and her 3 restaurants stayed busy from morning till night. It had been a long journey, one full of tears, long nights, and quiet moments of doubt. But now, the success spoke louder than anything her past could say. People who once ignored her now waited in line for a seat at her restaurant. They downloaded her app, praised her food, and even shared her quotes on social media. But Mira didn't care about the noise. She cared about the peace, the pride, the quiet satisfaction of building something with her own hands, her own sweat, and without anyone's permission. Sometimes she'd run into Dahlia, the same Dahlia who once laughed when Mira shared her dreams, the same Dahlia who told her she'd never become anything. Now, Dahlia stayed silent whenever their eyes met. No more mocking, no more harsh words, just quiet. Maybe it was shame, maybe regret. But Mira never asked. She had no time for bitterness. She had too much joy to carry. As for Nico, the man who once thought she was just a silly girl playing restaurant, he now stood when she entered the room. He greeted her with, "Madam," not because anyone forced him to, but because something in him had changed. Maybe it was the way she never fought back with insults. Maybe it was the way she didn't chase their approval. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because she had done what none of them thought she could. She never yelled. She never begged. She never threw her pain at them like a weapon. Instead, she turned it into fire. A fire that warmed her kitchen, her customers, and her soul. And now, that fire burned strong in every branch of her business. In her office, beside the window, and above her desk, sat a single photo frame. It didn't hold a family picture. It didn't hold any awards. It held a quote, one that meant more to her than any applause ever could. It read, "I made my dream the table, now they ask to sit at it."